Okay, good morning and ohayo gozaimasu. If I was back home, I would have said, which have meant, how are you doing, good citizens? But I'm here in Japan and I'm here to make a presentation, so I'll behave myself and talk to you a little bit about experiences, practical experiences in India, specifically in Nagaland, which I should explain where it is. I'm very glad with the wonderful presentation of Simon-san because there's a lot of principles that we agree and concur on, and I need to re-explain them again. So, thank you, Simon-san. Thank you to EcoPlus. Thank you for inviting us. Thank you to Waseda University for hosting us. My presentation would be more of storytelling. You like listening to stories? Yeah? You don't like storytelling? All right. Let's move on then. India. That's where I come from. But if you look at the map of India, this is the northeastern region. And the northeastern region is 7 states plus 1, second 8 states. 97% of the northeast of India is international border. If I have to travel from Delhi to my home, I have to cross Nepal, Bhutan and Bangladesh and get there. This little portion is the only link of land that connects us to the rest of India. We call that the chicken neck. It's like a small chicken neck which is very thin. And within the northeast, I come from Nagaland and I'm from the Ao tribe. As you can see, my jacket is a little takeaway from the larger shawl that we wear, which is the story of the qualities of a good warrior, but I will not get into that. Basically, we are land-based agriculturists. 80% of our entire economy is based on forestry and agriculture. And we still live a life that continues to be connected with nature. Very simple lives, getting complicated by the day as we progress. I don't know if that is progression, but it's getting more complicated. Our tools and equipments are still pretty rudimentary if you think of it. Lots of use of bamboo and cane. Entire agricultural system is rain-fed, which means no irrigation, no external inputs of chemicals. And we love our songs and dances. And the whole principle of learning emerges from there. And that's where it is based upon. Food in itself is a great way to appreciate one's culture and to learn about the resource base and the entire life around it. Now, if you look at when I say our entire learning system is based upon where we come from and where we live, and as Simon has very elaborately explained, everything we do is land-based. Everything we believe in, except for the stars, moon and the sun, is land-based. The spirits that we worship or adore are all land-based. And therefore, the place for us, and even the space which, as Simon has explained, is without history, but the space which is unexplainable also in many ways. So that becomes our canvas for learning. And the faculty to facilitate that learning begins from the individual family, the extended family, your clan, your neighborhood, your peer groups, and village as a whole. And therefore a whole process of collective learning is the entire principle behind it. In terms of how I would like to take the story, is basically to explore together the paradigm of place-based learning from the Naga perspective. Why is it that the purpose, a big deal of the purpose of learning is based on the how and not just on the why part? The challenge as well as an opportunity is the possibility of integrating past and current learning systems. I don't know whether I should use the word formal and non-formal, because that seems very externally and very judgmental on a system of learning. What may be formal today and what is non-formal, for us, that non-formal is our formal. You know what I mean? Until Western education came, what we have been doing for us is our formal education, and that continues even today. So it's beyond curriculums and grades, and I would love to try and bring together 2 case studies, and of course we can then proceed to the Q&A sessions without any conclusions from my end. So, am I going fast? Is it okay? All right, thank you. Learning, as we all know, and need not be told, is a community-based process. Unfortunately, in today's world, learning has become outsourced. We expect schools and colleges to teach children. And what about the role of parents and neighbors and elder brothers and sisters and grandfathers and grandmothers, or even strangers, to teach people to learn and grow? The community itself, and not just the schools, being looked upon as spaces and places and opportunities of learning, which means it's not just opening up your minds only when you're in a classroom, but opening up your minds whenever you're in public space, in common properties, when you go to the field, when you see your grandmother or grandfather doing something, asking questions, being inquisitive. And yes, we do also now have the wonderful opportunity of having access to the formal learning systems, if I may call it, or access to technology, which facilitates it even more. And I think, as we would all agree, learning is not just about being knowledgeable, but generally it's about, how do I become a good person? How do I become a person of value to my people to begin with? And culturally we have this saying that, oh, he knows, but he doesn't understand. He's good, but he cannot contribute. It's wonderful, but unfortunately of no value to society. And the challenge for us is, in our society today, when we are saying we say we're progressing, we're going to schools, we're opening up so many primary schools and high schools, and children are going there, getting higher grades, progressing year by year, are they becoming more invaluable to society? Are they becoming of less value, of less use in our cultural space? Are we making them misfits for our own society and preparing them to go out into an industrial mode of production where we don't know whether they've got a job or not? And that is a challenge we are facing today in terms of what is this education we are saying, what is this learning? And I'll get to that a little later. I think I'll get to that later, yeah. So if we focus on the issue of progress or processes, at the end of the day, there will be many books and research and knowledge, information that is available. But deep inside, especially when we interact and bring up children, is what are the cultural values and ethics that we are ingraining in these young minds? That is the foundation which will help him or her make use of the knowledge and education that he or she will get later on. Unfortunately, in my own society, although I am just a second generation educated person, it's already becoming shaky. Is that education? That's something that really needs to be looked about. Building upon traditional know-how, knowledge and practices is another opportunity or space for learning, and that is something that needs to be again really looked at from all perspectives, including from the formal scientific and research perspective, because a lot of the traditional know-how, knowledge, well, it's debatable. Some people say, does traditional knowledge need to be evaluated by formal science, or does it need to be validated by formal science? But maybe in some cases it does, especially if we are thinking in terms of medicinal uses. But again, if you think in terms of medicinal uses, how do you explain when a traditional healer would say, this plant is good for your stomach trouble so long as you pick it up in the morning from the southern side of the hill. But if you pick it up later on in the day, and if that plant is from the northern side or the western side, then it won't work so well. In fact, it's better for your arteries. How do you explain that? Because in science, it will give you certain properties of that plant, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but modern learning systems does have limitations, especially when it comes to issues of spirituality, issues of well-being from our perspectives. And unless and until we, from the community, as individuals, as parents, as teachers, try to fill in that gap of learning by engaging with the young minds when they're growing up, that gap will remain, and that is where place-based learning, but that is community-driven, is really important. The know-how also depends and talks a lot in terms of delivering justice, in terms of arts and crafts, in terms of, when I say arts and crafts, arts can be from the perspective of painting or handlooms and handicrafts, to many other skills, to farming, to educating children in terms of how to conduct oneself. and in different perspectives. Now, if I were to take the example of a farmer, which if I look at my society, in my society, my farmers are traditional farmers. We are shifting cultivators. I don't know how many of you would know what shifting cultivation is. We generally cut a plot of area, we burn that area, and we do farming on that for 2 years, and then we move on. And we have a cycle of, at least in my village, we have a cycle of 17 years before we come back to the same plot. Now, our traditional farmers have been made to think that they are primitive, unproductive, and destructive, because the government's policy has been pushing it down on them like that. Little do our children realize, and many of our young people now don't feel like to be even associated with that, because they feel shy to be seen to belong to a system that practices primitive, unproductive, destructive forms of land use. But if you look at this farmer, the knowledge that he or she has, it's amazing. To begin with, he knows the signs of the stars and the moons. He looks at that, he decides when and how to plant which seed on which day or the night before. They look at the seasons. They look at what's happening on the flowers today and decide that this year is going to be having lesser rain, and therefore the rice plant that I plant in my field this year shall be the drought-resistant variety. Because these farmers have a choice of 10, 13 varieties of rice that he can grow in his plot. Or this year it's going to be a little better. Which crops shall I grow along with my rice? Shall I also grow some beans? Shall I grow some other? So he's a soil scientist. He's looking into weather. He's looking into biodiversity management. He's planting plants that will attract certain insects, which are predator insects, with regard to certain other plants that are growing there. So that is the knowledge that is there within this so-called primitive farmer. And it's important that we look at the processes of how, in terms of what he or she does. I need to go a little faster now. Traditional knowledge, good, but let's not romanticize it. There are lots of good practices. There are also practices which might and should be stopped in terms of not being sustainable. As I said, people like me, second generation educated, we are slowly shifting away from a rural area to an urban area. And in the process, which I don't need to explain, and I'm sure Japan has already gone through it, the gap between the younger generation and the elder generations are just increasingly becoming so much so that the communication is becoming a big issue now. And when that happens, lost in cultural values, lost in cultural traditional pride, even in the practices. And which again is reinforcing what Simon said, the market economy, consumerism, and alienation from land practices has really begun to start eating into the systems that we have. And this issue of consumerism has really hit us very hard now, and we're very concerned, because it has not only led into health problems, into non-management of wealth, but also leading to a lot of pollution in the pristine countrysides that we used to have. Because everything that is coming from the stores ends up with some form of garbage or the other. And when you look at all that, the challenge that our communities are facing now is, and in fact this is said by one of the gentlemen in the meeting when we were discussing, he was saying, are we seeking knowledge at the cost of the experience and all the good wisdom that we have had? Or are we losing what we already knew and just blindly following what others are doing? And therefore, to understand that, it is important that the strategy to blend the formal and the non-formal, using the best of both worlds is something which the community has been trying to do. It is even more important from our perspective that this happens from the primary school level, because as children grow up, they usually tend to move away to higher education. As they seek higher education, they tend to move away from the place that they grew up in or are in, at least in our perspective. And when that happens, to bring them back as a tourist and try and re-educate them is a different level altogether. Start it when you still can. Collective responsibility and building on common property resources. My field can be your son's learning process. Like when we were growing up, we used to go to our neighbor's garden, make our own tents, get some vegetables, rice from different places and start cooking. In the process, we learn to cook, we learn to gather and harvest plants, we learn to share and so many other things. And of course, relying on social good and capital of community and school systems. The schools also have a lot to contribute in this way. When I'm talking about just community-based learning, it's not that we're completely oblivious of the formal school systems. There's a lot that we can extract from the schools and work together in terms of what we do. This, very quickly, I will not explain, but if you look at it, who are the types of people that we have in the community who can contribute to us? The elders, the educated, the skilled. What is the type of forest and land-based rivers and ecosystems that we have, which can really help us understand nature in a way that we should be understanding it? In terms of financial capital, what are the livelihood opportunities for the community? Where we need to start thinking in terms of what knowledge should we be seeking if I were to remain in this community to enhance financial capital. The physical capital, of course, what are the heritage buildings, what are the heritage sites that we have, what are the assets in terms of community buildings that we have, and most importantly, the social capital. How do we ensure that this rich social safety net continues to govern us and to teach us to be good to one another? So this, very quickly, is the place within the community. It can be your learning place, it can be the nature that you are, it can be during festivals, it can be during youth gatherings, it can be at any place that the community wants. Very quickly, the youth, the rediscovery excursions. I'm going a little fast because I know I'm getting towards the end of the time. Village rediscovery excursions is something my village did about 8 years ago. My village, people from my village, over the last 30 years have been educated and they have moved on. Some people have worked in the government service, some people have worked in other professional work in different towns and cities in Nagaland. Now their children have been born and brought up in outside our land. So those children have no idea of what my village is, unlike me, who was born in my village. So for them there is no connection to the society that they belonged to. Now they belong to a society in, say, Shinjuku, the apartment society where they live in. So what our village did was, we told the parents, we contacted them. It's easier for us here than probably in Japan. But we said, why don't you send your sons and daughters to the community? We will take care of them. It will not cost us anything. Every family can take care of 1-2 kids, not a problem. So the children came, and the elder man and elderly woman started educating the young people in terms of this is what our community is, this is how our traditional systems are, this is how we sing songs, this is how we engage with one another, this is how our institutions work, this is how we manage our resources. And also took the children visiting different ancient trade routes. And in the process, when we visited ancient trade routes, they started engaging with youth from other villages along the way. Now the idea of building a sustainable society, which Abe Sensei talked about in his opening remarks, such an activity brings up that process, where the human aspect of education comes in, where we start connecting with one another, where we start engaging at a different level of learning and a different level of wisdom altogether. So that is one example I wanted to quickly share. The other one is, within the communities, in formal education, we're getting so many skills, we're being taught so many new things, but many of them often we cannot practice at a rural setting. So skills that are important at a rural setting as it is, so that even if the children go to college and they don't manage to do well and they want to come back to the community, they will still have certain sets of skills that they can use for them with the community. Very quickly, last two slides. Very community-centered and driven. Policy is not always something that government makes. At the end of the day, what the community decides becomes the community's policy. And therefore, we should not say, oh, the policy doesn't work for us. We have the space and right to work within that policy and to innovate. Issues of how relevant what we are doing in terms of community values and community well-being. So it's not just using the community as a bouncing board or extracting knowledge from them, but ensuring that we go beyond the knowledge and well-being part, building upon what is and can be, in terms of understanding what is the situation, as Simon had also said, seeing what can be done and how can we go forward. And a whole series of activities have been planned around this principles. For example, we have had the community conserved areas, which the community has started, and later on maybe in the conservation group discussions we can discuss a little bit more about that. Community-based tourism, where the community themselves started organizing tourism festivals and tourism activities without any support from the government. And in the process, rejuvenating the entire traditional sports, arts and crafts. Community-based farm schools, where farmers get together and say that you're free to visit our farm, where we can teach you, and not only children, but even farmers from other villages do come sometimes to learn and share experiences. And finally, this is the last one, school teachers were just not co-facilitators, but in many cases they were learners, because many of the teachers themselves have not lived or grown up in the community. So it was a great learning experience for the teachers as well. Students and youth organizations who are not only considered as learners, but as partners in planning the learning process. Parents and community institutions were fully involved in terms of how do we engage, how do we support in terms of even financially, and therefore funding was not an issue in terms of if the community wants to do something, you don't really need to look for money unless it's something very elaborate. And sometimes there are certain national schemes, like the National Social Service Scheme, which governments give funding to schools to do social service activities. We can source such activities to continue place-based learning too. So very quickly, I'm so sorry I took you very fast, but that's the end of my story. Thank you very much.
No, 彼の服をもう一回ちょっと注目していただきたいと思って。すいません、ライター軽くしてもらえますか。いや。
I don't know what you said, so I won't say.
Oh.
Sorry. I just want to show you the jacket.
Oh.
So if you maybe this part, I will.
Yeah. Totally. Front and the back. You want me to explain?
Yeah, you can.
Well, this is just a modern innovation. Traditionally, we don't use jackets. If I was in my modern dress, I would have been freezing to death here because we don't wear pants and we just wear a loincloth. And this is always free for view. But this is basically a shawl that I showed earlier. It's a very big, almost like a blanket, and is worn by men. Men also, but those who are warriors. And the pictures of animals that you see, you have the star and the moon, which governs our entire life in terms of a cycle of events very in the beginning. We have the hornbill. You know the hornbill bird? I don't have a picture of the bird, but this is the hornbill bird. And these are the feathers of the hornbill, which we use. Well, I think I can explain a little bit from here. You see the headgear? That is usually the front tusks of the wild boar. The two main tusks of the wild boar. These are the tusks of elephant, the ivory, which we put our hands through. Well, it's not so environmentally and wildlife conservation friendly if I show everything, but this is these are tiger and bear claws. This one's here, the nails and the claws part. They take it out and make and so many other things. And usually this is bear skin, the skin of bear. Yeah. And the shield is usually from the dried skin of wild bison. We have one, so it's very hard. In some people they use elephant skin, but everyone cannot use elephant skin, and it's not easy to use elephant skin. But so it's hard. And the hornbill is very, very revered by us. It is a bird that we say that each male should be like a hornbill. It is faithful, it is protective of its family, and it does anything to protect the family. If you look at the hornbill, when the female lays the egg, it lays the egg inside the trunk of a tree. It makes a big hole, and the female goes inside that hole and sits with the eggs. The male comes and covers the whole hole with mud. And for the entire period of roosting over the eggs, that female will never come out. So the male will go every day to hunt, come back, feed the bird, and he continues this until the new chicks are born. And even when he comes to the nest, it's always in very high trees. It's never on a medium tree. And when he leaves the nest, he will never fly directly away from the nest in case other predators see. So he will dive down and hide somewhere and then fly out again in the open. And such is the devotion and skills and tactics of a hornbill. Or we have a rooster, a cock. Here, or maybe it's not there, I don't remember what is here. We say that our warriors need to be like a rooster. It fights to the death. It's agile on its feet. And so everything, a tiger, we have a tiger or a lion, it's never greedy. They don't eat more than what they should eat. They don't kill if it's not necessary. They rule the nature around them, but they don't bully or they don't venture into other people's food and properties. So these are just some examples. All these are natural dye. We dye them from different plants and leaves. These yellow ones are from orchids. So we use certain orchid roots to wrap it. This is molten goat hair, basically. Yeah, and we, some of the people have already asked me, these are cowrie shells, which are usually from the ocean and marines. But our traditional costumes have a lot of this, especially for women. So probably once upon a time, we either came across some seas, or maybe from Japan, I don't know. Or the Himalayas, as you know, was part of the Great Sea before it was formed into the Himalayas. So people have different theories. I don't know what it is. Thank you for listening to that. Yeah.
Abba-san, just turn around. Yeah. So you have a bison, and then this is the spike. How do you say? The spear. Yeah, spears for hunting, and then the middle is the sealed, or the shape with the white rings and drawn. And then the stars.
We worship the stars and the moons before Christianity came into us, so it comes in all forms everywhere we go. And some of the pictures here are the tattoo signs. Traditionally, we would have been tattooed, and we have tattoos on our chests and legs, which identifies my clan, my position in society, and in some cases, how many heads I've hunted.
Thank you again. Thank you very much. アンバさん、ありがとうございました。